In the spring of 1798, a young poet walked the hills above a small English village, scribbling lines about daffodils, about clouds, about the quiet ache of memory. He had no fame, no fortune, and a growing pile of rejected manuscripts. Nobody could have guessed that this man, wandering the countryside like a vagrant with a notebook, would end up rewriting the entire purpose of poetry itself. This is the story of William Wordsworth, the man who taught the world that the ordinary was worth writing about. William was born on April 7th, 1770 in Cockermouth, a market town tucked into the edge of England's Lake District. His father worked as a legal agent for a wealthy landowner, and the family lived comfortably enough, surrounded by rivers, fells, and open sky. Comfort didn't last. His mother died when he was just 7 years old, and his father followed 5 years later, leaving William and his 4 siblings essentially orphaned, split apart, and sent to live with different relatives. The estate that should have supported them was tangled in legal disputes that dragged on for decades. For a boy who had once run wild through the hills near his home, the world had suddenly become cold, fractured, and uncertain. It was grief, strangely enough, that pushed him toward nature. With his family scattered, William found something like solace in the landscape itself. The lakes, the crags, the changing light on the water. He attended Hawkshead Grammar School, where teachers actually encouraged him to read widely and think independently, a rare gift for the time. He later enrolled at Cambridge, but he was restless there, uninterested in the rigid curriculum, more drawn to long solitary walks than to lectures. In 1790, craving something bigger than English academic life, he set off on a walking tour through revolutionary France, arriving right as the country was catching fire with the ideals of liberty and equality. He was captivated. He believed, like so many young idealists of his generation, that he was witnessing the birth of a better world. Then the revolution he loved turned violent. The reign of terror swept through France. The guillotine became a daily ritual, and Britain declared war on the new French Republic. Wordsworth, who had fallen in love with a Frenchwoman named Annette Vallon and fathered a daughter with her, was forced to return to England alone, cut off from them by the outbreak of war. He arrived home disillusioned, financially unstable, and politically suspect, a man who had cheered on a revolution that had curdled into bloodshed. He drifted for years without direction, racked by guilt over abandoning his daughter, uncertain whether poetry could ever mean anything in a world that had just proven itself so brutal. The turning point came through friendship. Wordsworth grew close to a fellow poet named Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and the two men, along with William's sister Dorothy, moved to the West Country to live and write side by side. Dorothy, often overlooked by history, became his closest collaborator, filling journals with observations of nature that would directly shape his verse. Out of this partnership came a book that changed English literature, Lyrical Ballads, published in 1798. It rejected the ornate aristocratic poetry of the era in favor of plain language, common people, and everyday emotion. Critics at the time were baffled, some outright hostile, but Wordsworth wasn't chasing approval. In the preface to the second edition, he laid out a new philosophy of poetry, one built on what he called the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, recollected in tranquility. He settled with Dorothy and Grasmere in the heart of the Lake District in a small house that would become legendary as Dove Cottage. There, surrounded by the mountains and lakes of his childhood, he entered the most productive period of his life. He married Mary Hutchinson, a childhood friend, and the household grew warm and full, though it wasn't without sorrow. 2 of his children died young, and the grief nearly broke him. Still, he kept writing, composing what many now consider his masterpiece, The Prelude, an epic autobiographical poem tracing the growth of his own mind, from childhood wonder through revolutionary fervor to hard-won maturity. He worked on it for decades, revising it quietly, and it wasn't published until after his death. As Wordsworth aged, something curious happened. The radical young poet who once cheered a revolution grew increasingly conservative, both politically and artistically. Critics accused him of losing his edge, of becoming safe, even establishment. In 1843, he was named England's Poet Laureate, a strange final chapter for a man who had built his early career by rejecting literary convention entirely. He spent his last years in Rydal Mount, walking the same hills that had shaped him as a boy, until his death in April 1850, just days after his 80th birthday. Wordsworth's real legacy isn't just the poems themselves, it's the permission he gave to everyone who came after him. Before Wordsworth, poetry belonged to gods, kings, and grand historical events. After Wordsworth, poetry could belong to a field of daffodils, a solitary reaper singing in the hills, a child playing by a lake. He insisted that ordinary human experience, memory, memory, loss, wonder was worthy of the highest art. That single, quiet idea would go on to shape not just poets, but novelists, filmmakers, and songwriters for the next 2 centuries, all of them working in the shadow of a man who once wandered the Lake District, grieving and searching, and found the entire world in a single flower.